Creativity is a big topic. Evidently big enough that I had to split what I thought was going to be one podcast into 3 individual episodes. If you haven't listened to the other ones yet, don't worry. But this is part 3 of what I suppose is now a series on creativity, specifically on misconceptions and preconceptions about the topic. Let's dive into part 3 then, emotion and mindset, and how they impact creativity. And let's start by answering some questions about creativity. Answer might be the wrong way to state that, but I would like to take a look at some difficult questions around the subject. So let's begin here. Is failure necessary for creativity? I feel like I talk about failure a lot on this channel. I don't particularly like failure or failing. In fact, I find it rather revolting. I hate failing. I wish I could get through most of my tasks without ever encountering it, but that is simply not how life works. So I suppose I spend a lot of time on it, as someone who hates it, to better convince myself and others that, because it simply happens, we might as well find a way to deal with it. So, is it necessary for creativity? Likely not, at least in the abstract. But in all practical senses, yes, I think it is. This might seem like a trivial or strange way to look at it, but hey, it's me. This is how I think about everything. And what I mean by that is, in the abstract, no, you don't likely need to fail in order to be creative. But in reality, as humans who exist with emotions, who exist with skills that have to be built over time, who are never going to hit a flawless day in our entire lives, it's going to happen, and so we might as well prepare ourselves for it. Failure happens when you try new things or work on things that you have not fully developed proficiency in. So, if you continue to expand your boundaries to try out new things, failure will simply occur. And I mean this perhaps more specifically than you might think. If you try to draw a new kind of figure, a new kind of landscape, a new pose, anything that is new to you, expect failure. And this is just true, right? If you start to do gesture drawings, for example, you're working on figural things. If you haven't done gestural drawings before, the chances of you nailing them the first time you try, pretty much zero. Like, it can happen, it does happen, but then again, the chances of it happening subsequent times on subsequent new things is even more diminished. Think about it like odds. Let's say, for example, that it's a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to nail something the first time. It's likely much less than that, but the math will be simpler if we stay here. If it's a 1 in 10 chance that you understand gesture drawing and you're able to execute it perfectly the first time, then you have a 10% chance of that happening. Now let's say you move on to the next thing and you start working on muscle studies, and it's that same 1 in 10 chance, 10%. Well, now in order to nail a 1 in 10 twice in a row, I believe you're sitting at 1 in 100 chances. That went from 10% to 1%, and obviously this is going to continue to compound. So the chances of nailing something new, of being successful with something new, become diminished every single time you try something new. I think this is why instinctively people will often fight trying new things. They'll fall into their lane. This is the kind of art that I make, and I'm not straying from it. Whether they know that consciously or not, a lot of that seems to come from the fact that you have a lesser chance of failure. So when you try new things, just expect failure. Let it be almost a guidepost, something that just tells you that, yes, I am in fact trying new things, and I'm probably growing and progressing because failure is imminent. Failure happens. And then just shove that in a pile and keep moving forward. In all practicality, failure will likely be adjacent to creativity for almost all of us. In fact, people who feel otherwise likely just have a healthy understanding and/or different personal definition for what failure is. We use this word, toss it around like an old t-shirt, and it's almost lost some of its meaning. In fact, I've had comments in the past and I've had conversations with people that don't like my use of the word failure. I continue using it because I think that it communicates something visceral, whereas if I'm to alter my language, I don't think it will have quite the same impact. And most of us really do see it as failure. It's really a much healthier perspective to not see it as such, but I'm not necessarily talking to the people who have a really healthy understanding of what failure is, and that it's really just practice. It's moving through things, and it's a natural part. Whatever you call it, it exists. It is the not meeting your expectations when you set out to do something. And I'm just going to keep calling it failure because I think most people, regardless of if you've existed in an artistic world or it's new to you, will understand something about that concept. But simply, it is not hitting the mark. You tried to draw a figure and it didn't turn out within whatever level of proficiency you expected or desired. It failed. There can be an emotional response to the term, but for me, it's simply the most efficient way to look at it. So is failure necessary for creativity? In all practicality, probably yes. Sorry. Our next question, does an easy life make creativity more difficult? Oh man, this might be a really hard one. Right beside the starving artist trope, we have the tortured artist trope, the concept that people who lived more difficult lives are the ones who produce the most beautiful things. There is an air of darkness to this, one that I simply pray doesn't lead anyone to subject themselves to terrible things in the desperate hope that it will yield better artistic creations. But I think that there is truth to this, or at least truth in the opposite sense. A hard life often yields more creativity. Sometimes it is less that it yields more creativity and more that people who have had substantial struggles often have more of an impetus or a need to produce creative works. I saw in my teaching frequently that students worked through trauma of various kinds by diving into their artwork. One student in particular had a parent who was diagnosed with cancer. Their parent survived, but the situation was long and grueling, and art was a creative and productive outlet for that student during that time. They drove into their work, covering page after page, as a way of efficiently and dutifully using their time throughout the hospital stays and the loneliness at home. Part of my drawing in my youth was inspired by my father's travels, but was it also a response to my father's absence? Quite likely. Even though I grew up in the military where everyone's dad traveled and I didn't really feel like I was left behind, I didn't feel abandoned at all, there was likely still just some emotional thing about the absence of one of my parents. I only had my mother around most of the time. And my brother wasn't born until I was almost 7, so for a long period it was just my mother and I. I too spent a lot of time in middle and high school in hospitals as my grandfather struggled with health issues. A lot of that time I spent sitting in a hygienically sanitized corner drawing. People who experience hard times often dive into something, and for artists, that usually means diving into our art. Creativity seems to occur when you spend a lot of time in a particular thing, so it only seems reasonable that given certain circumstances, creativity might blossom, even if the soil is unpalatable. Now, this particular question and this particular stereotype also come from music, right? Music in the 70s and 80s, and probably before that, but I'm more aware of this music in the 70s and 80s. Lots of people on lots of drugs, having really hard times with life in a broad spectrum of ways. A lot of people dealing with lifestyles and personal decisions or ways that they felt like they were built that were not culturally acceptable, really going against a lot of cultural norms in a lot of ways. And there was a lot of pain in that. And from those circumstances, we get a lot of really interesting and really beautiful music and really beautiful art. And so there is something to this. It's hard to isolate, I think, psychologically why. What is happening that leads to these traits, that leads to these things. I think the danger here is just thinking that you have to have a really hard life in order to be creative. And conversely, what's occurring to me right now is that if you have had a really hard life and then you don't feel like you're creative, you might feel like you lost out on an opportunity. Like, oh crap, I endured all these terrible things and I'm not that creative. I wasted my trauma. I wasted these terrible life experiences. And that's probably not true. And it's also probably really, really unproductive and is not a good thing to put yourself through if you're already looking at your life and going, wow, I've experienced these really crappy things and I don't have anything to show for it. Sometimes that's life, and that sucks. And there's not really a nicer or kinder or more aesthetically appealing way for me to verbalize that. That just sucks. And sometimes life just sucks. And I'm sorry, and I hope that you have really good people in your life to help you through those things. But that's just part of being alive, part of human. Part of being a human. I get into these little pieces of conversation every once in a while, probably because I spent so much time with middle and high schoolers. And I think as humans, we often want a reason for the things that happen to us. We want some sense of a structure to the universe. And depending on what your religious views are, you might have a sense of that. But especially in kids who are often fighting everything, who are fighting their own understanding of religion, of the way the universe works, of universal constants, of what their parents believe, of what their schools teach, all these things, that's not often of much comfort. It's not of much encouragement to them what others think. And so they kind of have to sort through those things themselves. And so I think maybe that's why I land in these pockets pretty frequently, talking about these specific things. But I hope if you are in a situation like that, or you've experienced something like that, there is solace in understanding that there are other people who have endured those things too. And that's why I don't cut out these rambly, weird chunks, because sometimes this is exactly what one person needs to hear. And if this lands perfectly for that one person, then this whole podcast was justified. So I guess no, an easy life does not necessarily make you less creative, but I think the converse is more interesting. A difficult life can often put you in a situation where you have more or take more opportunities to become creative. But what do you all think? I've rambled a lot on this one. I would love to hear what you guys think about this one below, and let me know in the comments. Next question, is creativity logical or instinctive? This question was originally going to be its own podcast, and I suppose it still might be at some point, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. It occurs to me right off the bat that this might not be a simple either or. There is a possibility that it could be both. In one of the last episodes, I talked about how it is a common misconception that creativity is only instinctive, but even in that, I allowed for the reality that it is somewhat instinctive. I work on instinctive creativity most of the time. It's hard for me to explain sometimes how bizarre my ideas are and why they come out the way they do and where they come from. They kind of just pop into my head. So there are certainly instinctive components, but it is also a logical thing. Listening to videos and podcasts on world building, on character design, or even on writing, I have found that many creators simply approach creativity by combining unlikely or dissimilar things at a base level. Think about two ideas that don't necessarily have any connection to each other, and think about what might happen if you slam them together. This is a really common strategy. In fact, a lot of novels come out of this. A lot of video games come out of this, which I suppose probably means a lot of TV shows and movies and things like that as well. The idea of taking two things and just pushing them together and going, well, what if you took this kind of character and put them in this scenario? What if you took cowboys and put them in space? What if you took politics and put it in the far future? What if you took, you can run with this in 100 different ways. This is the premise behind my weekly warm-ups when I taught middle school and high school. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I would conjure up a list of ideas for the students to choose between for their 5-minute warm-up drawings. These ideas were often nonsensical, silly things. In fact, we do them now in the Discord server, so if you're interested, check that out in the link below. Many of these ideas were things like creating a machine that controls the weather, or an asteroid base, or the king of all penguins. They were literally ideas like that. They were just random things that I would pull out of my head. I would often try to put them in categories like a character of the week, creature of the week, environment of the week, object of the week. At one point, I expanded them to 6 different versions every single week, and I even did it a semester in advance, which was just this crazy amount of ideas on a single document. I would create those ideas not entirely illogically or instinctively, though. I had categories for how they would function. And let's start with creature of the week, for example. I knew it had to be a creature, so I'm going to have to work with some kind of animal. Now, it can be mythological or real, but most of the time I knew that I would work from an animal that was real. And then I would usually add just one modifier to it that would make it intriguing. Sometimes this is as simple as a metal armadillo, but it might be a robotic pangolin. It also could be, like I mentioned earlier, the king or the queen or the empress or a cybernetic. It doesn't really take a whole lot. You only have to throw in one other thing. Now, on particularly creative days, I could actually wrap that into something that would be far more like a character. We would go Earl, the Duke of Penguins, after he's lost his, celebrated historical lands. Well, that gives you a lot more to go off of, but it's also going to make it harder to do something in a 5-minute sketch. So there is some give and take there. But let's think about shows and movies and things like that for a minute. So think about the ones that you like, the books and shows that you like, and you find that creativity often comes from combining those two things together. The show Firefly, for example, is based on combining a Western with science fiction and then throwing it into some post-Civil War world building. Putting those things together initially requires no creativity, only arbitrary things that you slam together. Once you have that structure, you can now logically begin to solve problems, answering questions about what would naturally occur given those elements. In this sense, creativity can be highly logical. When I sit down to write or design something, I always try to look at the logic first, to look at the decisions that need to be made. Is this location on the side of a sea? Is it salt or fresh water? What longitude are we at? That will determine the temperature of the water, what animals live there, if there's a huge difference between spring, fall, summer, and winter. These logical decisions dictate my creativity, and they point me in a particular direction. I love doing this, by the way. This is one of the most fun things for me creatively. The ability to just sit down and start making these decisions. When I had to think about one nation in the book that I'm working on right now, and it's located up in the mountains, and I've known that since, I was like 12 or 13 years old. Like, this is what this country is going to be about, country or nation. And as I've thought about it over the years, I had to think about things that I had done in the storytelling and then how I could back them up with the world building, which is kind of the backwards way to do that from what I was just mentioning. But this is a group of people who are kind of highly disassociated with the rest of the world. That makes sense with them being up in the mountains. They also have some magic and some techniques that they use in metalsmithing and things like that. And they're really battle hardened. They're a really tough to beat military force. Well, given those circumstances, I started thinking about things from our own world. When people go on military campaigns, especially in our history, one of the biggest concerns was food. Another big concern is transportation. So I started thinking about, how do these people build roads? What can these people grow where they live in a place that is kind of like the Highlands in Scotland, but also at a high elevation like we are here in Colorado? I started thinking about things like rice that grow at high elevation, thinking about things like quinoa and other grains that grow at high elevation. Well, that started to unpack a little bit, and then I went, if you have rice paddies and you're growing high elevation grains, those often involve some large quantity of water. What else can you raise in the water? Well, you can raise waterfowl, you can raise fish, you can raise some small crustaceans. Well, a lot of cultures in Northern Africa and in Asia have many techniques for preserving those kinds of things. So all of a sudden you can dry out the rice, which makes it really stable for a long period of time. You can make jerkies and sausages from the waterfowl. You can actually just smoke or dry the shellfish and the fish, and all of a sudden you have an army that is capable of traveling remarkably long distances with food that is not very perishable. And having the fact that their country is located at a high elevation makes it really high for outsiders to invade, because just like here in Colorado, when we have people visit from other places in the world that are not used to being at elevation, if you take them up to 10,000 foot above sea level, they are struggling. It is harder because your body is not used to functioning in that environment. Whereas for us, we live almost 5,000 feet above sea level all the time. It's not a big deal for us. We can run and we can play and we can do all our normal physical activities. There's a reason why a lot of Olympic athletes train in Colorado, because we're already at a higher elevation. If your body gets used to that and then the Olympics happen to be at lower elevation, you have a little bit of a boost there. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but it's all of these things that these decisions come up when you allow yourself to really think about things logically. So I don't think that we can, with any definitive agreement, say that creativity is only instinctive. It is a highly logical thing. And it's really the merger of those two components, the instinctiveness, the letting your creativity run rampant, and then also being logical, thinking through all of the decisions, the problems, the questions that have to be answered with whatever it is that you're working with. Next question. Does style or creativity come first? This is an interesting one. I suppose it depends on if style is copied or truly original to you. That is likely a can of worms, as originality is a frankly unknowable and perhaps unreasonable quantity here. Individual and personal style, from my perspective, must come from a creative outlet first. You have to work through what you like making, what you don't like making, what that looks like, and hone it over time before style emerges. I don't think in almost any case style comes out first and then lends itself toward continued creativity. This just doesn't seem rational. It seems like the more time you put into a thing, the more creativity you employ or you spend, however you want to look at it, the closer you're going to get towards that ethereal thing we call style. I wonder if some people wait to become creative or wait to try out things that they think might fail until they have their personal style solidified. This is an interesting notion, one that might unfortunately serve as an excuse to keep people from trying new and different or difficult things. I've found frequently that we as artists try to hone in on one thing that is our thing. We hope desperately that we can find the right formula to learn art, to find our style, to become successful, or whatever mirage we are chasing up that hill. In reality, the journey is just hard and long, And there is no shortcut. There is no secret sauce. There is no special thing that you're going to find that's going to make your life tremendously easier. Style may be this for many people. For me, it is practice. I have a tendency to lean into practice rather than just making art. But this is something that I saw very frequently in school, and I think it's still something that we see on this platform as well. If you look up videos on how to find your art style, they seem to be very, very popular, and I wouldn't be surprised if any of you have watched them before. I've watched a couple just in pursuit of making video content, trying to find out what other people are making and what seems popular so I understand kind of the context of the platform. But truly, I don't know that there's ever going to be a perfect route to find your style. A lot of those videos tend to just point you in the direction of making a lot of art or copying the artists that you like, or like I mentioned earlier, taking two disparate things and shoving them together. You know, take two artists who have very different styles and then try to make something in the middle. And there might be some truth to that, almost a fusion cuisine type of thing. But to pursue that as your overall artistic goal seems ill-advised. I don't know that that is really much of a goal in and of itself actually at all. I think that it's really getting in the way of an actual goal. And this is what I mean by that. If you think that your goal is to settle on your art style, just think about what you want to do after that's been done. It's probably do something with that style, right? It's probably design a video game, or it's to write your book, or put your graphic novel or your comic book together. But it's probably something that needs to utilize the style. It needs to utilize that skill or that skill set or those character sheets, whatever it is that you've devised. That thing is your actual goal. And it may or may not require style. In fact, you probably could nail it down to being that thing that you want to do, and if you start working towards that separately and independently, you'll probably find style along the way. Now, that sounds a little bit optimistic, but I've found it to be true in my own work. If my goal is to settle on a particular style for my paintings, I spend a lot of time basically spinning my wheels. Nothing happens. But when I sit down and I just paint a lot, or if I sit down and try to find a strategy for painting that's more enjoyable, more tolerable, or allows me to work more consistently, all of a sudden I run into something that after 6 or 7 pieces is a style. And I've done the same thing with a lot of pieces, even the one you're watching right now. The style that is emerging from these is emerging from the fact that I've now spent 30 or 40 hours working with the brush pens on large-scale pieces like this. A style is starting to emerge, and that style is augmented by all of the Inktober pieces. Again, about 30 or 40 hours worth of work into a particular thing. If my goal had been to devise the style first, that first piece that I did, which you can go watch in my first Inktober 2023 video, you can go see that the character is not very well developed. It's just a nondescript person with a hat facing a giant spider. Actually, that's the second one, not the first one. It's the second one who uses a spider. The first one was a cute little bear thing. The style was not solidified, but the piece is still cool. I mean, the spider's a lot cooler than the character, but in the second piece that I utilized that character, it starts to come together. In the third piece that I started to, by about 4 or 5 iterations of the character is what you see before you. The hair changed a little bit over time. I've gone to some of my daughter's books and I've looked at how characters are represented there, and I've really solidified things. But it was through that work that the solidification happened. And I've seen this with a lot of my students when I was teaching high school specifically, is students that pursued style for style's sake very seldom got anywhere. The students who just went, well, heck, I'm gonna start creating things and I'm gonna see what happens. Those kids would very quickly find a style. Now, it might not be the style that they really wanted or the one that they stuck with for years and years, but they would solidify something quickly because they had to. If they were going to make 15 pieces in a series, they had to figure out who the character was or what the commonalities were between piece 1 and piece 15. That is style. It might not be a style that you like, but it's something that you're going to solidify and keep continuous through that entire process. I've got one student in mind that I'm thinking of that did a lot of work with mushrooms and these cute little shadow characters, and they were struggling with this a little bit, and then all of a sudden when they had to let the rubber meet the road, everything fell into place. And I'm not sure that the style that was established was the style that's going to be lashed onto permanently, but for a time there was a consistent style, and I really enjoyed it. And I saw this with most of my students, is those that focused particularly on style often struggled to find much of a style. Those that focused on their goal and just continued forward would almost always find a style, or just find a set of skills and a set of tendencies that is what a style is. A style is just a set of like tendencies that you bring into your art making. You often make noses this way. You often paint strokes this way. I start almost all my paintings with very bright backgrounds. That informs some of the stylistic decisions that happen in my paintings. If all the backgrounds are pinks, purples, and oranges, it gives a certain level of vibrancy to things. And when I don't cover the entirety of the canvas, that does things as well. These pieces here have stylistic elements to them. Things are simplified, other things are not simplified, and that's just how it goes. So no, don't feel like you need to have style down before you take a leap into creativity. Style will emerge slowly as you are creative, as you work toward trying new things. If you copy someone else's to get there quickly, it will be hollow, so just try new things. Mimic lots of styles, be creative, and in time, you will find something you enjoy. A consistency that becomes your style. Next question. What non-artistic habits influence creativity, for better or worse? I think this might stretch into things I have talked about in some prior videos. Eating healthily, sleeping enough, getting outside, working out. These kinds of things simply make your life better, and if your body and your mind are more healthy, then they are better able to accomplish artistic things. There is a tendency from artists to overfocus on the art, to forget to consider the fact that the art is an extension of you, and if you take good care of yourself, you are going to, by proxy, take better care of your art. I have a lot of young artists in my life, and I feel like for years I have been telling them to get enough sleep, to make sure they drink enough water, and to actually eat meals. There is an element of being the art dad, and there is also the practical element to this as well. We work better when we are healthy. If you are struggling mightily with mental health concerns, art is going to be more difficult. If you haven't eaten a meal yet today, then problem solving is going to be far more difficult than if you'll just sit down for a few minutes and sacrifice that time and get something to eat. Getting your blood sugar at a reasonable level makes your brain work more effectively and more efficiently. Other habits that impact this are going to be simple things like keep your space clean. If your space is organized, then art is a little bit easier to do. This might come down to making templates and things as well. I have a lot of templates for my writing, I have a lot of templates for tracking things, and I have a lot of templates for my digital work. This just makes, this sets me up so I don't have to make as many decisions when I get into the artwork. And I think that's really the biggest thing with keeping your space clean, is just eliminating excess work that keeps you from getting into the art making. Keep a healthy social life as well. It's important for you as an artist to have human inputs. I know by stereotype we are predominantly introverted, and I find that to be very true with the amount of artists that I've interacted with in my life. However, introverts are not devoid of a need for social contact. We need less of it, and we often get much more from small groups, and we get much more from people that we're already close to rather than meeting new people or engaging with larger groups. But again, artists are not a monolith. We're all very different, and we all interact differently with the world around us. So just understand that you have social needs and make sure those social needs get fed. Find new shows or video games that are exciting and inspiring for you. Just don't spend too much time on the video games instead of working on your art, but I get a lot of inspiration from video games, especially the Elden Ring and the new Zelda game, and yeah, I love Monster Hunter. I don't get a lot of inspiration from Monster Hunter, but the world building in Elden Ring is just, I still come back to it because everything is so decrepit and interesting and old, and there's so many more questions than answers, and it's so inspiring and interesting to me. So make sure you have something like that in your life. It could be books. It really could be just about any kind of media, but make sure you have some of those things. I think that's healthy for us as artists. Being an artist is simply part of being human for us. So if you take care of the human part of yourself, you'll be taking care of yourself as an artist too. We are not terribly separate. If I'm upset, sick, or malnourished, I make worse art. Take care of yourself. You are important. The last question for this third part of our creativity series. What is the relationship between motivation and creativity? Motivation is an interesting concept to me. I can be motivated to prove something to someone else or myself. I can be motivated by a grade or by the desire to earn money. I can be motivated to improve. Motivation is often extrinsic, meaning it comes from outside of you as an individual, but it can also be intrinsic, meaning that it comes from within you, a particular need or desire that you possess to do a thing, to achieve a thing. If you are going to work on your art, work on being more creative, or simply engage in creative things, you need some manner of motivation. The trick, I suppose, comes from waiting for it like inspiration. Motivation might be like a wild horse. It exists, it might bear you for a time, but it is untamed and it has a distinct will of its own. If you want to tame it, to utilize it, bend it to your will so you don't live at its whims, you have to put in the time and work to do it. I have heard from many people over the years that they did not do something because they weren't motivated or didn't feel motivated. I find this rather puzzling because it seems to hinge on the idea that motivation must be present in order to do a thing. Maybe on an atomic level this is true, like I am motivated to sweep the floors because they are dirty and it agitates me, or do I do it without motivation just because it needs done? I don't know. I pull lots of things like this apart in my brain. I think we have to be careful to combat any notion that we should only work on our creative studies when we feel the desire to do so, though. If you want to get better, to improve, and especially if you want to make a career out of this at some point, you are going to have to find a way to work on it when you don't want to. I don't always want to make these videos. I don't always want to show up and do what I have to do. It's just part of being a human. I would say part of being an adult, but it's actually not true. How many times when you were in elementary school did you just not want to go to school that day, but you have to? There are a lot of things in life that are really important that we have to do, but we don't want to in that moment. We don't have the motivation to do them in that moment. I pretty much never want to clean the dishes. Every once in a while, my 4-year-old daughter will tell me I don't want to when I ask her to do some menial task. Usually this is like picking up her toys or just that I'm asking her to put one toy away before she gets the next one out. I usually resort then to a logical breakdown of how we don't always get to do the things that we want to do. I know much of it's lost on her being young, but I also know that at some point it will make sense. And it's a revolutionary concept for a young child that sometimes you have to do a thing just because it needs to be done. But this is reality, and at some point that logical matrix for her is going to connect, and it's going to be like, oh, well, I hate that he's saying this, but I understand that it's true. And this is true for our art as well, with your creative endeavors. Unless you do this just for fun, I guess then you can ignore this. Or not, it's up to you. But if you really want to get better at art, you're going to have to find a way to work on it when you're not necessarily motivated. Or maybe the more productive way to look at this is you're going to have to learn how to construct and inflate motivation, how to build it for yourself. This is a lot of what I do in my own personal artistic endeavors. I sit down frequently and don't want to draw in that moment in the time that I've set aside for it. I don't want to write at the end of the day after my wife and daughter have gone to bed and I'm really tired and really rather just go play video games. But I have the schedule, I have the time, and I know that I'm supposed to do 1,000 words every night. I know that I'm supposed to draw a little bit every single day. These are things that I hold myself to. Do I hit it every day? No, but I usually get about 28 to 29 days a month on both of them. And that's, for me, that's good. That's impressive. I'm happy that I'm able to do that. But I try to hold myself to those things, and they both have further motivations, right? The motivation for getting the artwork done is my art skills improve so that I can make the children's book that I want to, so that I can work on graphic novels at some point. It's also for the videos. If I don't make artwork, then I have nothing to put in my videos, and I've started to get more people that are enjoying that and more people that are getting things out of it. So it seems like I am being kind, and I don't want to let people down if I don't do that. If I don't keep writing, then I'll never finish my book. And I'll be like so many people who just have never followed through on a thing. And I don't want that. I want to finish. I want to see what happens. I don't know if it'll be great or terrible or if it all will be published, but I need to see it through. I need to finish it. And I know that there'll be a satisfaction in finishing it. And I'm also excited for like the next thing after I finish it. It's mammoth right now. It's like 209,000 words. And I have at least 50 or 60,000 more words to go to finish it. And once it finishes, like I'll feel good about it. Even if I go back to read it later, I'm like, this sucks. I'll be able to sit in the knowledge that I finished that thing. And so for me, those are some of my motivations. So no, you don't need active motivation coming out of the ether to push you, but sometimes you have to build your own motivation. Well, as always, thank you for your time. This, what was supposed to be one episode on creativity, has obviously expanded quite a bit. It's now 3 episodes, and maybe I'll keep going later. If you have any further questions, anything that I didn't cover, anything that you run into in your life, leave it in the comments below. I would love to hear about it. If you want to look into joining our community, we have the Discord link in the comments down below, and if you would like to support the channel, the Patreon link is down there as well. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.